Today is the day we can finally loosen our lips on the all-new RockShox ZEB Vivid Air, Lyrik and Super Deluxe, and there is a metric boatload of tech to absorb. I flew over to Queenstown in New Zealand back in February for the official media launch, and we spent the week tuning air springs, turning dials, and figuring out what all this new tech is about. I'm going to be focusing on the ZEB and Vivid Air in this video review, and Will has a written article up on the website for the Lyrik and Super Deluxe. Let's get into it. The intended use of the ZEB has not changed for the newest iteration. It still uses the same 38mm chassis. It's available in 27.5 and 29-inch configurations. It uses a 15 by 110mm through axle, and it's available in travel numbers from 150mm up to 180mm. That's pretty much where the similarities end from the new to the old ZEB. Inside this guy, we have the new Linear XL air spring, which is designed to be far more linear than its predecessor. To do that, they've gone away from the standard debonair of the previous generation and gone to a tube-in-tube cartridge style air spring. Along with that air spring, we have the new Linear XL Air Annex. This is an external bulge on the air side lower leg, designed to add air volume to that lower leg. The problem it solves is as the fork goes through the travel, it essentially builds up pressure in the lower leg. Now, it's only on the non-drive side because the drive side, the damper side, natively has more air volume in that lower leg. So the idea behind the Air Annex is to match the air volume from the damper side so we have the same ramp up from side to side. One of the biggest differences the new fork also sees is the introduction of ABO, adjustable bottom out. So this uses a rubber bumper in the bottom of the fork, which is adjustable with the dial on the bottom. What that does is essentially softens the blow at the end of the stroke. Now, it's adjustable in the sense that you can move that bumper up and down, which has a 10mm range. In its most retracted setting, it engages at the last 7mm of the travel, and in its fully extended setting, it engages at the last 17mm of travel. There are 8 positions, 7 clicks, and you can tune that however you like. On the inside of the upper tubes, we also have the brand's butter wagon technology, which we saw released on the Boxer back in February. This is essentially a matrix of dimples, which is designed to fill with oil as the fork cycles through its travel, essentially pulling oil up into the fork, lubricating the bushings and reducing friction. Now onto the damper side of things, we've got the Charger 3.2, which is architecturally very, very similar to the Charger 3.1. They have refined some of the oil flow paths, but the main difference between the 3.1 and the 3.2 is a much, much heavier compression and rebound tune to deal with the lack of friction that is now in the ZEB. As for weight, our RockShox ZEB weighs in at 2,613 grams, and that is with the mudguard I have installed here. And onto price, they have increased slightly from the previous generation due to the increased material in that air spring side. They're now 2,235 Australian dollars for the ZEB Ultimate. There are a heap of other minor details which I won't run through here, including updated seals, bushes, oil, bleeder valves. All of that stuff is over in the written article on the website, so if you're chasing more nitty-gritty details, check that out. Moving on to the Vivid Air, the intended use of this guy also has not changed. It remains the burliest air shock in the brand's lineup, tailored for enduro and downhill use. Architecturally, the Vivid Air hasn't changed too much, and it carries over a lot of the design features from the outgoing model. Visually, the most obvious change you'll see is the updated reservoir on the top here, which is actually the same reservoir shared from the Vivid Coil, Vivid Air we have here, as well as the Super Deluxe. Inside the shock, we have revised shim stack tunes and revised oil paths to smoothen out the flow. This adds mid-stroke support and feel, and more importantly, reduces the IFP pressure from 200 PSI down to 120 PSI. Now what that does is essentially reduce the breakaway force in the shock, so RockShox claim this is the most supple air shock on the market. Because of that, touchdown technology, which featured in the previous version, is now a thing of the past, as that was essentially a band-aid fix for excessive friction. They've also got a new Linear XL air can, which has a larger positive and negative air spring and is designed to match the linear feel of the Vivid coil. We've also got adjustable bottom mount up the top here, which is essentially rebranded hydraulic bottom mount from the previous generation, designed to match the naming to the fork. It's functionally identical to the previous iteration and kicks in at the last 20% of travel and has 5 clicks of adjustability. For the ultimate level shock, we've got low speed compression, high speed compression, rebound, as well as a revised lockout lever, which is far easier to adjust. The confirmed weight of our shock here with the mounting hardware is 723 grams, and price-wise, they start at $1,340 for the ultimate trim. So on to setup. RockShox, as normal, has a handy guide on the back of the fork for starting pressures and then recommends starting with the low speed and high speed dials in the 0 position. The fork will likely come stock with 0 tokens installed, and they do recommend keeping it that way because then you can use the bottom out bumper to adjust that bottom out support. Now the pressures are a lot higher thanks to the Linear XL air spring. For example, I used to run 56 PSI in my old ZEB, and on the new one, I've landed in around 125 PSI. To tune that in, I was using about 5 to 10 PSI windows to adjust the feel, whereas on the old ZEB, you were more looking at 1 to 2 PSI ranges to tweak and fine tune the feel of the fork. Now what that means is this is going to be a lot easier for folks to find a happy pressure rather than tweaking with 1 to 2 PSI. Lighter riders are going to have a far easier time tuning the new ZEB thanks to the Linear XL air spring. For example, the lightest weight they list on the chart on the fork is 55 kilos, and that still runs around 90 PSI, and the damping characteristics should still work for that rider weight. Now back onto the tokens. As I said, RockShox recommends not using tokens to start with because you can use the ABO bottom out bumper to tune that last end of the stroke. Now tokens previously were the only way to tune that bottom out support. However, that then affected the mid-stroke of the travel, and there was no way to sort of separate the two. A common complaint with the outgoing fork is the rebound tune was potentially not fast enough for some folks. Now I can happily say that the rebound tune on this one is a fair bit quicker. It's not crazy fast, but folks who struggled on the previous version should be able to find a happy tune with this one. Onto the shock. On my Santa Cruz Bronson, I started at about 230 PSI and ended up running around 220 and lent a little bit heavier on the high speed compression and the bottom out. It had 2 tokens fitted from stock, and I never really felt the need to try add a third. Good news is that the volume spaces are the same between the new shock and the old, so if you do have volume spaces kicking around, they will fit in the new version. Now when dialing in the fork and shock over in Queenstown, one of the things that stood out is how noticeable each click of compression actually felt. You can actually feel the fork or shock progressively choke up with each click of compression, and RockShox claim there is essentially 0 crosstalk on both the fork and shock between the low speed and high speed compression. Now this is going to sound a little bit cringy, but hear me out. The fork and the shock feel like a more cohesive package than previous versions. The alignment of the dials and the naming between the fork and the shock feels really intuitive, but the actual compression tune between the two also feels like they match really well. Now I actually ended up running the exact same compression settings between the fork and the shock because it feels really balanced front to rear. Now that is not my OCD kicking in there, that is how RockShox have designed this package to work. Now the first thing I noticed when riding the ZEB in Queenstown is just how composed and supple this fork feels. Small bumps, big bumps, braking bumps, it doesn't really matter. It just remains really active throughout the stroke and has a really light, fluttery feel. Back-to-back laps in the Queenstown bike park with the old ZEB versus the new ZEB was a pretty eye-opening experience. By no means is the old ZEB a bad fork, but when you compare it against the new one, they have made some massive improvements. The ability to plow this fork into rocks and it remain really smooth and really composed is pretty bloody impressive. On the old fork in comparison, it would give a lot of trail feedback and the hand fatigue was really noticeable, whereas on the new fork, it just remains really smooth and your hands felt noticeably fresher at the bottom of a rowdy lap. Now, I think all of that comes down to the linear nature of the air spring, whereas the old one, as we all know, was really progressive. So as this gets further into the stroke, it still remains really light to get the thing moving, whereas the old fork required a fair bit of force to reach that end of the stroke. I think all of that is what makes this one far, far smoother when you're getting really rowdy and pushing it pretty hard. On our test track over in Queenstown, Squid Run, there's this one left-hand really flat corner that is littered with roots. On the old ZEB, I seem to get spat really wide and it made the corner really awkward, whereas on the new ZEB, I seem to be able to hold a much tighter inside line and it made the corner feel much more normal and far smoother. Now onto the adjustable bottom out. In the real world, this has had a pretty drastic effect on the feel of the fork. Those really harsh, metallic, thwacking bottom outs that the old ZEB used to make when you reach the end of the travel are simply no more. The bottom out bumper does seem quite firm, so riders with a really soft setup will notice a fairly firm transition as it kicks in, but that's the beauty of the adjustability. You can tone that right back so it only kicks in the last 7 millimeters of the travel. Now I've just come off the back of doing our long-term test with the Fox Podium, and I do think the new ZEB and the Podium share some characteristics. In a straight line, the new ZEB just seems to delete bumps, something that the Podium also does really, really well. The ZEB seems to stay composed just like the Podium, but the ZEB definitely seems to manage its travel a little bit better, whereas the Podium definitely seemed to use its travel far, far easier. There's also a similar touchdown feeling when landing awkward flat drops, as the ZEB just seems to float through the initial part of the stroke. Now the ZEB and the Podium are two very different forks, however. There's obviously the construction differences. The Podium also has that torsional flex when in the off cambers it delivers exceptional grip, but it's also much heavier, it has a heap of livability quirks, and it is about $1,000 more expensive. Now I've been rolling on the updated suspension package for around 6 weeks, and that is a mile short of a long-term test, but it is enough to shake out any gremlins. Partway through testing, the CSU of this fork started exhibiting some clicking noises under compressions. Now speaking with the RockShox team, the forks that we were given to test in Queenstown were part of a pre-production sample batch built for media testing. Now they have implemented a fix for production forks, so folks spending their hard-earned cash shouldn't have any issues. So to wrap things up, I have pretty much no performance complaints on the updated suspension package. It is highly adjustable, there are noticeable changes between each click of compression and rebound, and it is super, super smooth throughout the stroke. One of the biggest things folks will notice is the new ZEB is far, far easier to set up than the previous version. What that means is it's going to be easier for folks to find that happy window rather than fiddling around for days on end trying to find that perfect setup. And I think that appeals to a broader range of riders. Now the adjustability still doesn't match the fidelity of Fox, but on the flip side, the simpler setup from RockShox is going to be a bit more user-friendly, and it's going to suit a wider range of riders. Now I think in the past 5 years, we've been in this cycle of minor updates, of revisions rather than full redesigns. This feels like a full redesign. They've gone all the way back to the drawing board, and there are tangible real-world benefits between the old and the new. Now onto the Vivid Air, it is still an impressive performer. It is ultra sensitive, highly adjustable, and matches the fluttery feeling of the ZEB up front. The revised lockout lever is genuinely lighter, so much so that I actually seem to use it, especially when it's mounted low down on my Santa Cruz Bronson. The friction reduction they have done to this shock is pretty impressive, but the performance gap between the new and old Vivid Air doesn't seem anywhere near as big compared to the older new ZEB. This one feels like more of an update rather than a complete redesign, and if you've already got an old Vivid Air, it will likely pair really well with the new ZEB. Alrighty folks, that wraps up our video review of the RockShox ZEB and Vivid Air. As I said, Will has crafted a written review of the Lyrik and Super Deluxe, and there is some really neat technology in that rear shock. That's definitely worth a read. Link will be in the description below. Same goes for the ZEB and Vivid Air. There's a heap more detail in the written review along with some FAQs. So if you're chasing a few more details, head on over there. Link will also be in the description. If you have any unanswered questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you out on the trails.